The damage you absorbed wasn't designed for survival. It was engineered to erase you from existence, to collapse your bloodline before it could breathe another generation, to ensure your name became a cautionary whisper instead of a legacy. But here you stand, breathing, walking, evolving, and that terrifies them more than any revenge you could ever plot. They watch you now with a different kind of attention, not curiosity, fear, the kind that crawls into their sleep and whispers that maybe they didn't just fail to destroy you. Maybe they created something they can't control, something they can't predict, something that rewrote the rules of what survival even means. You're not supposed to be here. The mathematics of your destruction were calculated with precision. Every betrayal was a strategic demolition point. Every wound was placed to hit structural integrity. Every night they left you bleeding in the dark was meant to be the final chapter. They built your grave with their hands and stood around it waiting for the earth to swallow you whole. But the earth rejected their offering, because what they didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly comprehend in their limited framework of power and control, is that some souls don't break the way physics predicts. Some people absorb damage, like black holes absorb light, transforming it into something else entirely, something denser, something that bends reality around it. You became that anomaly. The trauma they inflicted wasn't just survived, it was metabolized, converted into a fuel source they can't contaminate. They watch you move through the world now and can't recognize the formula. You're operating on principles they never learned, speaking languages they can't decode, building empires on ground they swore was scorched earth. And it's driving them insane. Every morning you wake up and choose to continue is a psychological weapon against everyone who bet on your destruction. Your existence has become their crisis. Your healing has become their haunting. Your growth has become the evidence that they were never as powerful as they convinced themselves they were. They told themselves stories to sleep at night. Narratives where you stayed broken, where you internalized their violence and turned it inward until you consumed yourself, where you became the cautionary tale they could reference when breaking others. But you refused the script. You looked at the damage and asked a question they never anticipated. What if this is preparation instead of punishment? What if every bone they broke was teaching my skeleton to rebuild stronger? What if every betrayal was showing me exactly who deserves no access to my future? What if they weren't destroying me? What if they were just revealing what I'm actually made of? And when you asked those questions, everything shifted. The pain didn't decrease. Let's be clear about that. You didn't transcend suffering through some spiritual bypass or toxic positivity mantra. You walked through fire that would have turned entire family trees to ash. You carried weight that crushed people with pedigrees and privilege and support systems. You absorbed venom that was chemically designed to stop your heart. But you kept moving. Not because you were strong in the Hollywood movie sense. Not because you had some superhuman resilience gene. You kept moving because stopping meant they won. And something in you, something ancient and stubborn and absolutely unwilling to grant them that satisfaction, refused to give them the ending they orchestrated. So you crawled when walking was impossible. You whispered when screaming took too much energy. You existed in the smallest, most defiant ways when grand gestures were beyond reach. And those tiny rebellions compounded into something they never predicted: survival. Not just biological survival, not just heart still beating, lungs still breathing existence, but psychological survival, emotional survival, spiritual survival, the kind of survival that means you didn't just live through it, you lived beyond it. You carried your consciousness intact through dimensions of suffering that were supposed to fragment you into pieces too small to ever reassemble. They study you now like an equation that doesn't balance. They review the footage of your destruction and can't locate the moment you were supposed to collapse. They compare notes and swap theories about how you're still standing when the math says you should be hospitalized or institutionalized or 6 feet under. Some of them have convinced themselves you're faking it, that this is performance, that behind closed doors, You're as destroyed as you should be, and you're just maintaining appearances through sheer willpower that will eventually crack. They wait for that crack with desperate hope. They need you to break eventually because your continued existence is challenging their entire understanding of power. Others have gone quiet. They don't mention your name anymore. They scroll past your updates with shaking hands. They see your growth and feel their own foundations trembling. Because if you can survive what they did, if you can not just survive but thrive, then what does that say about their power? What does that reveal about their emptiness? It reveals everything. It reveals that their cruelty was never strength. It was compensation for weakness they couldn't face. It reveals that their ability to damage others was never power. It was the only currency they had, because building was beyond their capacity. It reveals that they were never the gods they pretended to be. They were just humans with unhealed wounds, weaponizing their pain against anyone who reminded them of their own fragility. And you reminded them. Not through anything you said or did, simply through existing. Through carrying light they didn't possess. Through holding standards they couldn't meet. Through representing possibilities they'd already decided were impossible. Your presence was a mirror they couldn't shatter, so they tried to shatter you instead. But mirrors don't work that way. You can crack the glass, but the reflection doesn't disappear. It multiplies, fragments into hundreds of pieces, each one still showing them exactly what they tried to destroy. And now, they see you everywhere. In every success they can't explain away. In every boundary you maintain that they can't cross. In every level you reach that they swore was reserved for people unlike you. Your survival isn't just personal victory, it's historical disruption. Generational pattern interruption. You were supposed to be the confirmation that people like you don't make it. That certain backgrounds or certain traumas or certain combinations of hardship create permanent ceilings. Your family tree was supposed to end in whispers and warnings. Your story was supposed to be the evidence they used when crushing the next person. But you became evidence of something else entirely. Evidence that damage assessment isn't destiny. That past generations' failures or traumas or limitations don't dictate future possibilities. That bloodlines can be rebuilt by single individuals who refuse to accept extinction. You looked at centuries of dysfunction and decided it ends with you. Not through avoidance or denial, but through absolute transformation. You metabolized generational curses into generational blessings. You took the poverty and turned it into purpose. You took the abuse and turned it into advocacy. You took the abandonment and turned it into independence. You took everything that was supposed to be your inheritance of suffering and transmuted it into something they have no framework to comprehend. And that alchemy terrifies them, because if you can do it, others can too. If your transformation is possible, their narratives collapse. If your healing is real, their excuses evaporate. Your existence at this level of integration and success and peace means they can't keep telling themselves that certain damages are permanent, that certain people are disposable, that certain futures are predetermined. You're walking proof that consciousness is more powerful than circumstance. That choice is more definitive than chance. That who you decide to become matters more than who you were told you'd be. And that proof is destabilizing everything they built their identities on. Watch them now. Watch how they move differently around you, how they measure their words with new caution, how they stop themselves mid-sentence when they remember who they're talking to. They've realized something that chills them to the core. You're not predictable anymore. The person they thought they broke would react certain ways, accept certain treatment, remain within certain boundaries. That person is gone. In their place stands someone who survived damage that should have been lethal and emerged with patterns they can't track. You've developed new instincts, new standards, new reflexes that don't match their manipulation playbook. They try the old tactics and watch them bounce off you like arrows hitting titanium. They deploy the emotional triggers that used to control you and see them dissolve before reaching your nervous system. They attempt the shame and guilt and fear programming and discover you've upgraded your entire operating system. Their administrator access has been revoked. Their backdoor codes don't work. Their passwords to your vulnerability have all been changed. And they panic, because controlling you was how they managed their own chaos. Diminishing you was how they maintained their illusion of superiority. Keeping you damaged was how they avoided facing their own need for healing. Your transformation removes all those coping mechanisms simultaneously. Now they have to sit with themselves, with their choices, with the reality of who they actually are when they can't define themselves in contrast to your suffering. Some of them will try to reconnect, not because they've changed, because your success has changed their assessment of your value. You're suddenly worth knowing again, worth claiming connection to, worth mentioning at gatherings where they need social proof of their own evolution. They'll approach with carefully crafted apologies that are really just auditions for access to your next chapter. See through it. See through the performance of growth that's actually just repackaged manipulation. See through the sudden interest in your well-being that's actually assessment of what they can extract. See through the nostalgia for old times that's actually an attempt to gaslight you into forgetting why those times ended. Your survival has earned you new vision. Not just the ability to see who people are, but the clarity to see what they're actually doing versus what they're claiming to do. You can track deception now like a native language. You can feel inauthenticity before it finishes introducing itself. You can identify manipulation while it's still warming up in the bullpen. This wasn't a skill you wanted to develop. It was forged in necessity. Every betrayal was a lesson in reading subtext. Every dissection was training in trusting your instincts over their explanations. Every moment of gaslighting was education in the gap between performed reality and actual truth. You graduated with honors from a university of suffering they designed, and now you're operating with credentials they can't counterfeit. They try to duplicate your energy, but it reads as imitation. They attempt your boundaries, but theirs collapse under the slightest pressure. They study your piece, but can't locate the source code because it was compiled in conditions they never endured. Your transformation isn't transferable through observation. It was earned through obliteration. You were disassembled molecule by molecule and reassembled according to new blueprints. They tried to demolish you, but accidentally initiated the most comprehensive reconstruction project your soul has ever undergone. Every piece they broke became an opportunity to rebuild differently. Every scar became a bookmark for wisdom. Every wound became a window into capacities you didn't know existed. They created a monster, not in the destructive sense, in the mythological sense, something beyond ordinary categorization, something that survived what myths are made of, something that rewrote the rules simply by refusing to die according to their timeline. And monsters don't follow the same protocols as regular humans. You don't move through social dynamics the same way anymore. You don't perform emotional labor for people who haven't earned your energy. You don't maintain relationships out of guilt or history or fear of being seen as difficult. You've calculated the cost of your peace and decided it's non-negotiable. That calculation terrifies them because it means you've assigned value to yourself that's independent of their validation. You're not seeking their approval anymore, not performing for their acceptance, not twisting yourself into shapes that fit their comfort levels. You've become fundamentally unavailable for the roles they need you to play in their unhealed narratives. Some will call this transformation arrogance. Let them. Their discomfort with your self-knowledge isn't your responsibility to manage. When you stop abandoning yourself to accommodate others, those who benefited from your self-abandonment will accuse you of abandoning them. But you're not leaving anyone behind. You're just refusing to leave yourself behind anymore. That refusal is revolutionary in a world built on people accepting less than they deserve, on swallowing mistreatment to maintain false peace, on performing forgiveness before healing is complete. Your decision to honor your actual experience over their preferred narrative is an act of warfare, not against them specifically, against every system that requires your diminishment for its continued operation. You've become ungovernable in the most beautiful way, not through rebellion for its own sake, through alignment with truth, your truth. the reality of what you experienced and what you survived and what you became in the process. You're no longer willing to edit that story to make others comfortable. You're no longer available to minimize your trauma so they don't have to face their complicity. You're no longer performing the role of healed before the healing is finished to ease their guilt. This authenticity is a weapon they have no defense against. They can handle your anger. Anger can be dismissed as bitterness or inability to move on. They can handle your sadness. Sadness can be pitied and therefore controlled, but they cannot handle your clarity. Your calm, centered, absolutely certain clarity about who they are and what they did and why you're choosing to exist beyond their reach now. That clarity makes them invisible in ways their egos can't survive. You're not obsessed with them anymore. Not plotting revenge or refreshing their social media or rehearsing confrontations in your head. You've moved into a reality where they simply don't matter at the level they once did. They're data points in your history, not determining factors in your future. And that demotion from central character to footnote is more devastating to them than any revenge plot you could execute. Because revenge would mean they still matter. It would mean they still occupy real estate in your consciousness. It would mean they still have power to influence your choices, even if those choices are harmful to them. But your indifference, that authentic, hard-won indifference, means they've lost even that. You've evicted them from your mental space entirely. Not through spiritual bypassing or forced forgiveness, through genuine transformation that makes their opinions and reactions and existence peripheral to your actual life. They can love you or hate you or anything in between, and it changes nothing about your trajectory. Your healing doesn't require their acknowledgement. Your success doesn't need their validation. Your peace exists completely independent of their presence or absence. And that independence is the final evidence that you survived what was supposed to end you. True survival isn't just staying alive. It's reclaiming autonomy over your narrative. It's rebuilding your internal architecture according to your own specifications. It's developing an identity so solid that external chaos can't penetrate it. You've done all three. You took the shattered pieces they left scattered and built something they never imagined. Not a replica of what existed before. Something entirely new. Something forged in conditions that would have destroyed the previous version. Something that only exists because you were broken in specific ways and chose to rebuild with intention rather than desperation. That building process is what they can't replicate. They see the finished product, your success, your peace, your obvious upgrade, and want the results without the process. They want the transformation without the demolition. They want the wisdom without the wounds. They want to skip the part where everything you thought you were dies so something truer can be born. But that's not how alchemy works. You don't get the gold without the fire. You don't get the diamond without the pressure. You don't get the sword without the forge. And you don't get the level of integration and power you now possess without walking through the specific hell they constructed for you and choosing to see it as initiation rather than elimination. That reframe was everything. That moment when you stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And started asking, what is this making possible in me? That was the turning point. That was when you stopped being a victim of your circumstances and became an architect of your transformation. They can't touch that. They can't diminish it or steal it or talk you out of it. It's yours. Forged in fires they lit but couldn't control. Tempered in darkness they weaponized but couldn't manipulate. Sharpened by pain they inflicted but couldn't command. You became the blade they tried to break, and now they're cut by your clarity every time they get close enough to try the old patterns. Your boundaries draw blood. Your standards leave marks. Your requirements create casualties among those who thought access to you was guaranteed regardless of how they treated you. And watching them bleed out from their own entitlement is its own kind of justice. Not because you're sadistic, because you're finally prioritizing your well-being over their comfort. Because you've realized that protecting your peace sometimes means letting others experience the consequences of their choices. Because you understand now that allowing mistreatment to avoid conflict isn't kindness. It's complicity in your own destruction. So you stopped being kind in ways that killed you. You stopped being understanding in ways that excused abuse. You stopped being forgiving in ways that enabled repetition. You became something more valuable than nice. You became honest, real, boundaried, selective, unavailable for dynamics that require your diminishment. This version of you is the nightmare they tried to prevent by destroying you early. They sensed your potential and moved to eliminate it before it could fully develop. But they miscalculated. They thought breaking you would stop you. They didn't realize it would just remove everything that wasn't essential, strip away everything that wasn't truly you, burn off all the conditioning and people-pleasing and false beliefs until only the core remained. And your core is unbreakable, not because it's hard or rigid or defensive, because it's aligned, coherent, integrated. All the parts of you that used to be fragmented and at war with each other have formed a coalition. Your mind and heart and gut and spirit all speak the same language now. All move in the same direction. All serve the same purpose, your continued evolution into whatever you're meant to become. They wanted you to become nothing. You chose to become everything you were always supposed to be, but couldn't access while carrying their projections and expectations and limitations. Their absence from your life created space. Their betrayal created clarity. Their damage created the necessity for a healing so deep it reached wounds you didn't know existed. You healed things your ancestors couldn't name. Broke cycles your family had normalized for generations. Confronted patterns that everyone before you just accepted as the way things are. You looked at inherited dysfunction and said, not anymore. Not through me. It ends here. That decision, that singular, powerful decision to be the one who breaks the chain, is what makes you dangerous to everyone invested in the old systems. You're not just healing yourself. You're healing backward and forward through your bloodline, releasing future generations from prisons they haven't even been born into yet, freeing past generations from burdens they carried to their graves. Your healing is time travel. Your transformation is disrupting cause and effect. Your refusal to stay damaged is rewriting histories and futures simultaneously. And that kind of power doesn't go unnoticed by forces that prefer people broken and predictable. So they're watching you. Not just the individuals who hurt you, the systems, the structures, the patterns themselves are studying you like an anomaly that needs to be understood or eliminated before it spreads. Because if you can do this, if you can survive and transform and transcend at this level, you become evidence that liberation is possible, that healing is achievable. That damage isn't destiny, and if others start believing that, if your example becomes contagious, everything changes. That's what they're actually afraid of. Not you specifically, what you represent, the threat you pose to the narrative that some people are just broken beyond repair, that some damage is permanent, that some families are cursed, that some individuals should just accept their lot and stop reaching for more. You're living refutation of all those lies, walking proof that consciousness can override circumstance, breathing evidence that will is more powerful than fate. And every day you continue to exist at this level of functionality and success and peace, you undermine another brick in the prison they built to contain people like you. Keep going, keep healing, keep growing, keep becoming more impossible to ignore and harder to dismiss. Keep being the person they swore you'd never be. Keep achieving the things they promised yourself you'd never reach. Keep accessing the peace they said you'd never find. Keep building the life they said you didn't deserve. Because your existence isn't just personal anymore. It's political. It's powerful. It's proof. Proof that the damage they inflicted wasn't the end of your story. It was barely even the middle. You're still writing chapters they can't predict. Still creating outcomes they can't control. Still evolving beyond their ability to categorize or contain or comprehend. You survived damage that would have ended entire bloodlines. You absorbed trauma that was designed to be genetic poison. You carried weight that crushed everyone who came before you. And you didn't just survive it, you transmuted it into power they'll never possess. Into wisdom they'll never earn. Into freedom they'll never experience, because they're still trapped in the same patterns you broke. That's what happens when you refuse to die on someone else's timeline. You don't just survive, you transcend. You don't just heal, you evolve. You don't just continue. You become categorical evidence that transformation is real and possible and accessible to anyone willing to walk through fire and come out forged. You are that evidence. Living, breathing, undeniable. And that's exactly what terrifies them. Not what you did to survive, what you became because of it. Something they can't explain away or minimize or destroy with the same tools they used before. You're playing a completely different game now, operating on frequencies they can't detect, building in dimensions they can't perceive, moving according to principles they never learned. And there's no catching you now, no predicting you, no stopping you. You survive the unsurvivable. Everything after that is just momentum. They know it. You know it. The only question left is how far you're willing to take this, how much you're willing to become, how completely you're willing to step into the power that was always yours but required obliteration to access. The answer should terrify them even more than your survival already does, because you're just getting started.